Once upon a time, names were considered much more important than they seem to be today in our own Western culture. In ancient history, someone's name not only designated who the person was, but also described the person. For instance, the name Adam means human or earthling, and comes from the Hebrew word Adam, which means earth or ground. And in the creation story, it's used throughout chapters 2 and 3 of Genesis to describe God's creation, which was made from the dust of the earth before it was ever used as a name in the 4th chapter. Often names are given to describe what was taking place at the time of birth. That was the case with Jacob. You see, he was a twin, and he had been born holding on to his brother's heel. So he was given the name Jacob, which means, aptly enough, he takes hold of the heel. But it also had another meaning. And the other meaning was he deceives, which was especially appropriate in Jacob's case. Deception had always played a part of Jacob's life. He intentionally tricked his brother Esau into giving up the brother's birthright for a bowl of stew. And he intentionally deceived his father into giving him a blessing which rightfully belonged to his brother. But there were instances in Jacob's life in which his deception probably wasn't intentional, but instead simply a part of his identity. You see, Jacob was a gender transgressor. And by that I mean he didn't fit neatly into the male gender role that had been assigned to him at birth. Whereas his brother Esau was depicted as a man's man, the Bible calling him a skillful hunter and a man of the field, Jacob was a different sort. In fact, he had always been different. He was described as a quiet man with smooth skin who stuck to the indoors, notably whipping up delicious meals for the menfolk. Meals good enough to make his big and burly bear of a brother willing to trade in his birthright just for a taste of Jacob's culinary specialties, as I already mentioned. So Jacob wasn't always a deceiver by choice. He had been born into the role, behaving in ways that were natural to him, even if those ways didn't fit the cultural male stereotype. Gay men, lesbians, and bisexuals know what it means to transgress gender roles, but probably no one knows better than our transgender siblings. Members of the transgender community know what it's like to not fit into a society that's ruled by a binary gender model of only two sexes, male and female. They are well aware of a society that allows for only one set of choices. Either a person must self-define as exclusively male or female, or else admit to being unnatural, mutant, or abnormal. And people who identify as transgender are well acquainted with the pain and struggle that comes from trying to fit into a society that is unwilling to make room for them. Transgender people are 4 times more likely to live in poverty. They experience unemployment at twice the rate of the general population. 90% of transgender people report experiencing harassment, mistreatment, or discrimination on the job. More than 1 out of 5 of those surveyed who have interacted with police reported harassment by police with much higher rates reported by people of color. 41% of those surveyed, 41% reported attempting suicide, compared to 1.6% of the general population. And in 2012, more than half of all anti-LGBT homicide victims were transgender women. Yes, our trans siblings know what it's like to struggle. They know what it's like to literally fight for their lives and to wrestle through the night with God. And so did Jacob in this morning's scripture. That's where our story picks up. This morning's ancient tale about a nighttime wrestling match with God may sound strange and mysterious unless you understand it in terms of the struggle that so many of us have experienced with society and mainstream Christianity and other religions. Our transgender siblings have confronted discrimination on every front and fought to live authentically. They have demanded dignity and respect. And like Jacob in this morning's reading, they have relentlessly struggled for the blessing which most of the Christian church has stubbornly and self-righteously withheld from them. On one hand, the nighttime stranger seems to be a human opponent in this scripture reading, and is even referred to as a man. And yet the reading also implies the stranger was God. It's as if the image is blurry and indistinct. And when we struggle with church doctrine, I think it can indeed be rather hard to distinguish what is human influence and what is God's divine inspiration. And it's only after a long, lonely struggle that each of us must go through on our own that we are able to make it to the dawn, a dawn that brings with it God's blessing. In this morning's story, that blessing was symbolized by a new name. No longer would he go by the name of Jacob, the deceiver, but now he would be called by the name Israel, which means one who prevails in their struggles against humanity and God. And that's why today we honor our transgender siblings. We honor them for their tenacity in demanding the blessing that is rightfully theirs. In so doing, they become our models. Today we pay tribute to members of the transgender community who are more closely made in the image of God than any of us. People who help us get a handle on God, who is neither male nor female on one hand and both mother and father to us on the other. Today we celebrate members of the trans community who refuse to shrink themselves to fit into what our society happens to define as proper gender identities, roles, and presentations. A community which in fact embraces Jesus' words, "I came that you may have life and have it abundantly," as they make the decision to live out their lives authentically, regardless of the opinions of others. Today we recognize a people who have struggled against society and against society's false image of God and prevailed in their struggle. For it's in their struggle that, like Jacob, they have come face to face with God, crying out for God's blessing. And if they are lucky, experiencing that blessing as they come to accept themselves. We've each received a new name. Regardless of the name that our parents have given us, our new name is beloved. We are God's own beloved children. And as we are able to embrace that truth, then we are more likely to love ourselves and others. As we receive the blessing that God freely bestows on us, we are able to answer God's call to bless others. May we see our transgender siblings as the courageous, tenacious, spiritual teachers that they are. People made in God's image, people who won't rest until they receive and experience the blessing. A blessing they so desperately cry out for. People living as authentically as they dare, and in so doing, honoring God with their lives and their bodies. Amen.